It's an absolute privilege for me to be here at the World Economic Forum. For those of you who are in Geneva and you know your geography, we're the other side of the lake. And there's a kind of a metaphor for that. How many of you here are from international organizations, UN, that kind of thing? Okay, perfect. So you will know all about the Sustainable Development Goals more than anybody, and how important it is to deliver them by 2030, and that there are 17, and Goal 17 is all about partnerships and collaboration. But you will also know, being in that mix, that you are at the kind of center of trying to figure out how other people can get involved. So it's more than just the international community, it's more than just governments, it's cities and states and provinces and value chains and investors and businesses and small-scale farmers and large-scale corporations. That's at the heart of that delivery mechanism for the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's about collaboration, as one of the colleagues said earlier in the introduction. But that's really hard. The transaction costs of collaboration are really hard. Another colleague, I think, said, I'm here to learn. The transfer of information, the flow of what's good, and importantly, this issue of scale. We always talk about scale. Is it a pilot project or is it a big thing? One of the words at the moment in the SDG community is transformational. How can we absolutely make a change that is so big and so important it will deliver against the targets for 2030 for the Sustainable Development Goals? And that, I would posit, is probably at the core of the challenge, which is a good challenge for the Global Coffee Platform. I'm really excited to be here. What is the best thing ever is that word here. I mean, global coffee, obviously, but platform. You didn't choose program, and you didn't choose project. You chose platform. And I'm sure that there was quite a deliberate kind of set of discussions about that. But the idea of platform scale is really, really important. Here at the World Economic Forum, we are an international organization for public-private cooperation. We talk about systems change, not about projects. And I think that's kind of something to bear in mind. You might all have a particular project. You might be here to have a coffee outside and to talk to a particular donor or corporate or somebody else and thinking, oh, if I could get $150,000 from them, that would really help my piece of research. I would suggest to you that that is not a platform approach. That's kind of rent-seeking for your individual exercise, which kind of lies at the heart of the challenge. The platform, as the wonderful moderator said, is all of you. Imagine what that combined network would do to change the game and how you could work with each other along the value chain to spread not 200,000, but maybe $6 million into that process. And that is the name of the game at the moment. That's what all the conversations were around at the United Nations General Assembly week last week. I'm sure some of you were there having meetings and such. But it is about transformation and is about platform scale. Think outside of the coffee industry and into other areas. Think retail. Think what Amazon has done to absolutely change the name of the game in retail. That's platform scale. Think in mobility. Think in the hotel industry. That idea of platform scale is percolating its way through into collaborations and partnerships. It's not about a project anymore, it's about a platform. So it's really excellent that you chose the phrase platform. And what I'd like to do is not kind of tell you about everything you know about coffee, because you're by far the better experts in that, but to offer some thoughts from other sectors where people have taken on this challenge and have tried to move forward. And hopefully that will kind of give you some thoughts and inspiration about the discussions that you have here today and tomorrow. The World Economic Forum itself is a platform. And how many of you from the corporate side are members of the World Economic Forum here today? Very good. So thank you for your membership. Then you understand the idea of us as this sort of platform for public-private cooperation. We're an international organization under Swiss government hosting, so the same as the IUCN, the Conservation Industry Organization, or the Federation of the Red Cross. But we're a platform that engages the foremost minds from business, politics, and others to shape agendas. I've had the privilege to try and build the kind of environmental sustainability agenda that includes things like climate change, water security, forests, land use, biodiversity, and such. And it absolutely involves helping to shape and create these kind of collaborative approaches, these sorts of platforms. And there's one particularly that I want to talk to you about today, and hopefully it's a journey that might have some resonation for you. That's in the forestry space. So imagine a room like this, but you're in New York, not in Geneva. 2013, and imagine that you are not coffee experts across the value chain, but you're in the area of forestry. Some of you are in palm oil, some of you are in soy, beef, paper pulp, some of you are NGOs with voluntary standards and roundtables. Some of you are from the development community thinking, how do I pump public money into a kind of global architecture to pay for performance for countries to not chop their trees down? Some of you from the science community saying, this is an absolutely terrible situation. We're losing acres and acres of forest. Something has to be done. Others of you are from the investor community. We would like to kind of have sustainably sourced commodities. We'd like to invest in that, but we don't know how. Pretty fractured community with all sorts of different approaches going on. That was the state of the agenda for the forestry community about 2012, 2013. Now, the forestry community has a platform. And the platform that they have is called the Tropical Forest Alliance. And note, actually, the interesting thing, 2020, TFA 2020. There's a time-bound goal to that alliance, which might be something you want to think about. But it's an umbrella partnership that brings together, so it resonates, public, private, civil society into doing something. What does it want to do? It used the research of its community to try and boil down some of the challenges into specifics. So the research suggested that half of the world's tropical deforestation was driven by just 4 commodities which were being unsustainably sourced. I mentioned some of them: palm oil, beef, soy, paper and pulp. That's 4 value chains. That's 4 related sets of companies, corporations, smallholder farmers, governments, key jurisdictions, key markets involved in those supply chains. So if one could mobilize action across those supply chains to transform the sustainable sourcing of those commodities, that's half of the problem of deforestation dealt with. There was World Resources Institute kind of data which provided that. So there's a science-based underpinning to the coalition. We've amassed all the research, and here is kind of how we kind of target the problem. But importantly, the problem was put in the context of the 3 sectors, so the public sector, the civil society, and the private sector. And you'll notice there are phrases here like market signal and investment, as well as pilot projects. So the second element of this Tropical Forest Alliance, which was developed to bring together a rather disparate forestry community, was not just to kind of zero in on the best research to identify the problem, but to also balance the civil society, the private sector, as well as the public sector intention. So the public sector intention at the global level was stop deforestation, reduce emissions, meet the SDGs, if you like. The public sector at a jurisdictional level in a country was grow my economy. You know, one can see a sort of tension there. Smallholder farmers and smallholder farmer groups improve productivity, but we know we have to do that in a sustainable way. Private sector, okay, so how do I get to scale here? And how, if I'm interested in sourcing these commodities, where is the scaled market that I can go to? So what happened from that is, as well as a target, a time-bound target, as well as a focus on identifying a goal around the best scientific research, was a balance. And the balance that came up with was both to produce commodities from the forest sector and protect the forest at the same time. Produce and protect. It wasn't sustainability is more important than productivity. It wasn't that productivity was more important than sustainability. It was you can do both together at the same time. And how do we get our heads around doing that at scale in a certain time frame? And that was a really, really tough journey for the civil society groups here. So I don't know how many of you sort of from NGOs or research organizations. Okay, so this is pretty interesting because to engage in this sort of discussion means a kind of a little bit of a move outside of the comfort zone. You might have a particular standard or a particular roundtable process or a particular goal that you have in mind which defines your goal and mission of your organization. So might somebody else. At an international level, WRI did, the World Resources Institute, Greenpeace did, the World Wildlife Fund did, IUCN did. But from the other side of the table, it's kind of, so if you consolidate that, what is the ask? What is the best science telling us? And that is a journey in this alliance that the civil society groups went on and are continuing to go on. And it's a really important journey because actually you will win your strategic goal from it. You will not win your strategic goal, I would suggest, if you just think it's about how do I protect my piece of research and extract $250,000 from somebody so I can continue to do my piece of research. That is not a platform mentality. Tough one, but a really important one because the scale of opportunity is so large. So, some of the nuts and bolts of this. This thing was created for the Rio Plus 20 conference in 2012, the Tropical Forest Alliance. It came from the industry side, something called a Consumer Goods Forum, which has multiple companies in it. Some of you are probably members of the Consumer Goods Forum. And it had an association with a couple of development agencies, to start with USAID. It kind of went a bit sleepy after 2012, but was reignited on the route to the Paris Climate Conference in 2015. So a lesson there is, where is the big moment in time that gives a political slingshot for the platform that you are looking for? Where between now and 2020 is the space that you can see that will give real momentum to this? And I would argue that there are some. There are events and activities out there. The climate community know that they have to have a pivot moment by 2020, 5 years on from Paris. You can absolutely use that if you kind of drive the research to show the emissions reduction potential from this platform. The development community absolutely have a 2020 deadline to show that they are building those Goal 17 partnerships en route to 2030 to deliver the SDGs. Every year at the General Assembly, there will be a kind of gathering to show that. You could be there with the Global Coffee platform to show that here is our trajectory to deliver on the SDGs, produce and protect. The international community is very hungry for these large-scale collaborative platforms to deliver that outcome. But be strategic, I would counsel, and think, okay, 2 or 3 years from now, where is our first forcing function milestone to show, what we're going to do and what we have assembled already? That's what the TFA has done. It's got 47 civil society organizations in it, 47. So, I've counted maybe about 12, 13 hands there quickly. So, quadruple that and then think about the transaction costs. But the absolute power of having that kind of network of civil society people against a common goal. 44 companies, 15 governments. Governments is a really, really important one in this, not just international organizations, because there's a jurisdiction, there's a Kenya, there's a Tanzania, there's an Ethiopia, there's a Colombia. And not only is there a Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Colombia, there's a district or province, or there's a village. And that connection, and I saw that in your cards, which looked really powerful, between the local and the global, is so important. It's that classic sort of T-shaped thing. Here's the horizontal across the top. Here is the global platform with all these great large companies and roasters and international organizations. But here are the proof points in particular provinces and particular jurisdictions of how we do this, how we grow sustainably, how we improve livelihoods and deliver the sustainability goals. That is what this alliance is trying to figure out. Those governments include the development agency type of governments like the Norways and the Dutch, and the Brits and others, but it includes, importantly, Indonesia, Brazil, Colombia, and it includes 9 governments across West and Central Africa who have about 70% of the forested canopy in Africa. And why are they there? For exactly some of the reasons that some of your colleagues here said. They want to kind of learn and engage, but they've also got markets to build. And this is the really important thing, because that is about the economic development thrust of this. The TFA is not there to be a sustainability kind of guardian. It's there to grow sustainable production, produce and protect. So there's a very interesting development in terms of the power of the platform, which is this. So if you think that you can't really change the game and really it's a coordination platform, I would argue, raise the bar. Think about the intentionality that you want to create from the Global Coffee platform, because these folk did, and it's pretty interesting. 7 West and Central African countries, as you can imagine, the Cameroons, the DRCs, et cetera, noticed that there was an increasing desire across the value chain in the palm oil space from manufacturers and retailers to have sustainably sourced palm oil. And there was a search for that at scale. Might sound a bit familiar. They wanted to find out more. They used the platform of the Tropical Forest Alliance to talk to companies and investors about how can we organize ourselves as a collective market to produce at scale the product that you seek. The outcome was a very, very interesting, it was probably the most significant thing that came out of the Marrakesh Climate Conference, which was last year, which was the Africa Palm Oil Initiative. As I say, about 70% of the forest cover in Africa represented by these 7 governments who have collectively agreed, almost like a market framework, whereby we will not deforest to create unsustainably sourced palm oil. We will work with you through the value chain, manufacturers and retailers, to deliver product into the market at scale. So now the work begins at that jurisdictional level to try and make that happen. But the power of that did not come from a project. It did not come from a program. It did not come from one agency's initiative. It came from a network like this, where conversations started to realize at scale what could be done. So that's the platform bit. From it, of course, will come projects. There'll be a project in Cameroon. There'll be a project in the DRC, which will involve local NGOs, civil society, farmers. But the platform created the scale change. And that's the important thing in terms of some of these outcomes I would suggest to you. What this Tropical Forest Alliance does is it uses a lot of digital technology to map things, so it's very easy for partners and stakeholders to look in and drill in and find out what's going on and who's involved. There's even on mobile devices a sort of digital device where you can kind of connect with everybody else in the Tropical Forest Alliance. There's about kind of 450 members worldwide, but if I'm a smallholder farmer of palm oil in Indonesia, I could connect to a company representative in the US through the app. So that kind of connectivity is really important because it actually creates a vibrancy of a network as opposed to just meeting once a year. So I would suggest as well that in terms of platform technologies, that's something to consider. It also, and that's why I'll stop because our friend is holding up the time signaling. But the other interesting thing is do not think that we have to kind of create something that the agenda needs and then we will get kind of support from the international community. It's actually quite the other way around. If there's a mobilization of effort, a large-scale platform, what will happen is the international organizations and key governments will respond positively to that, provided the goals are clear, it relates to the SDGs, and there seems to be intentionality. In the Tropical Forest Alliance, it has triggered funds from the GEF, the Global Environment Facility, from the government of Norway, and from several others. And you will notice, if you look at the literature now, in the international space, even in the greenhouse here in Geneva, that there's much more talk about produce and protect, about partnerships between the public and private, in the forest space to deliver clean, deforestation-free supply chains. That did not exist at scale about 4 years ago. The international community respond well to a very clear kind of market signal that there's intentionality to do something about that. That's the moment in time we're at, because these goals have been set by the international community to deliver outcomes by 2030. The build process is now, I would suggest to you. So be confident, be bold, and do not think that this cannot be consequential, because it surely can. That's the experience that we've had in this Tropical Forest Alliance, and at the World Economic Forum, we are happy to help and provide any facilitation or support we can for our members and constituents and for such a great idea. Thank you.